This is the story of how I might hold the world record for the fastest a brand new, self-appointed HOA president ever lost her entire little kingdom, her dignity, her HOA, and eventually her house. The best part? She handed me the dynamite and the matches herself. All because I refused to pay a ridiculously fabricated fee just to access my own family's private lake. It's a pretty wild saga of suburban warfare that got so out of hand, the police were called. But the person they ended up cautioning wasn't me, the guy in the worn-out jeans. It was the woman in the pristine white tennis skirt who thought she ruled the water when, in reality, she was just a tenant in my world, a guest in my castle. It all started when I inherited my great-grandfather's legacy. Grandpa Elias was a quiet, shrewd investor back in the 1940s, and he bought a massive parcel of land in upstate New York, including a small, spring-fed lake people around here, just called Blue Heron Lake. Instead of chopping it up into a typical subdivision, he did something odd. He sectioned off 10 large lots right around the shoreline, built solid houses on them, and then leased them out long-term. Crucially, he kept the lake itself, the beachfront, and the surrounding 50 acres of dense woodland as his own private reserve, all managed by a quiet family trust. My father managed it before me, a true hands-off kind of guy. When he passed, the entire portfolio fell into my lap. I'm a civil engineer by trade. Blueprints and property lines are my native language. But managing a portfolio of long-term tenants was a whole new world. I decided the best way to learn the lay of the land was to live in the small, original cottage Grandpa Elias had kept for himself. It was set back from the lake, rustic as hell, but it was private. For the first few months, it was idyllic. I spent my weekends mapping the property, assessing the docks, and just enjoying the absolute peace. I met a few of the older residents on my walks. They were quiet, respectful folks who had been there for decades. They all seemed to deeply understand and respect the long-standing arrangement. The houses were theirs to live in, but the land was the trust's. Then, about 4 months in, I saw the new Lexus SUV for the first time. It was a pearl white RX, parked in front of the largest house on the lake, Lot 1. The lease on that one had just turned over a year before I took over. The driver was a woman I would soon know as Tiffany Sterling. My first official introduction to Tiffany was an ambush. I was down by the water, checking the integrity of an old stone retaining wall Grandpa Elias had built, when I heard the sharp crunch of expensive gravel behind me. "Excuse me," a voice dripped with manufactured authority. Tiffany, in ridiculous expensive athletic wear, her hair a blonde fortress, stood there with her husband, Scott, who looked perpetually uncomfortable. Tiffany's eyes weren't looking at me. They were fixed with disdain on the ancient stone in my hand. "We do not allow residents to alter the community-facing infrastructure without a formal proposal to the board," she announced. "The board?" I asked, trying to mask the flicker of amusement. "Yes, the Blue Heron Lake Homeowners Association," she said, puffing up slightly. "I'm Tiffany, the president. This is my husband, Scott. He's the treasurer." I found this absolutely fascinating because, as far as I knew from the trust documents, no such organization had any legal basis for existing. "I wasn't aware there was an HOA," I said. "Well, there is. We formed it 6 months ago to maintain the property values and aesthetic standards of our community. It was a bit of a mess before we stepped in." She eyed my rustic cottage with profound disapproval. "You'll need to get registered with the association. There's a $500 initiation fee and monthly dues of $200. It covers landscaping for the common areas, lake maintenance, and our legal fund." I almost laughed. "And the common areas would be what exactly?" I asked, gesturing vaguely at the forest around us. "The entryway, the lakefront path, all of it, right?" she said, try to regain control. "I'll have to look into that. I don't believe my lease mentions an HOA." Her expression soured instantly. "All residents are required to be members. It's not optional." We had a vote. It was unanimous. I knew for a fact that at least 3 of the older tenants hadn't even heard of it. Old Mr. Henderson had told me last week how much he disliked the new bossy woman. "Well, Tiffany," I said, giving her my most non-committal smile. "It was interesting meeting you. You and Scott have a nice day." I turned and walked away. She had just tried to charge the landlord rent for access to his own property. The war had begun, but only one of us had the full map of the battlefield. The first official salvo from Tiffany arrived a week later. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope personally placed in my mailbox. A federal law violation I filed away. Inside was a letter on her ridiculous aspirational letterhead, the Blue Heron Lake Homeowners Aesthetics Association. The logo was an awful clip art swan. The letter, signed by Tiffany S., President, detailed my supposed violations, my cottage's rustic appearance, unpainted wood siding, and my canoe leaning against a tree. It gave me 30 days to submit a remediation plan, which had to include a full exterior repainting from an approved palette of beiges, naturally, and the construction of a storage shed. The letter ended with a reminder that my $500 initiation fee was now past due and that a late penalty of $50 had been applied. I didn't respond. I took the letter, scanned it, and placed it in a new folder labeled Tiffany. I then spent the weekend driving to the county records office. I pulled the original plat maps from the 1940s, the deed of sale, and every single zoning ordinance. The result was a beautiful, unbroken chain of ownership, residing solely with my family's trust. The land wasn't a subdivision, and HOA had as much legal standing here as the Tooth Fairy. My next step was to talk to Mr. Henderson in Lot 7. His smile vanished when I mentioned the HOA. Her, he sighed. She showed up here last year. All smiles and casseroles. Next thing you know, she's calling a community meeting. Only her husband and the couple from Lot 3 were there. That's when they voted to create the HOA. This was the smoking gun. The unanimous vote was a sham conducted with a tiny, terrified minority. She's been sending us letters too, he continued, his voice low. Want me to tear out these roses, says they're disorderly. My wife planted these roses. A flicker of genuine anger crossed his face. I've just been paying the dues to keep the peace. $200 a month. It's robbery, but at my age, I don't have the energy to fight. My blood began to boil. She was extorting elderly residents. I thanked Mr. Henderson, told him not to worry, and said I was looking into the matter. Tiffany, however, was not content with a war of letters. About 2 weeks after her first letter, I was out in my canoe when her voice shattered the peace, projected across the water by a megaphone. Resident of Lot 11, your watercraft is not registered with the association. Please return to shore immediately. I was in the middle of the lake. My lake. I just kept paddling. This, I knew, would be seen as an act of open rebellion. The next afternoon, Scott, the spineless treasurer, appeared at my door, clutching a clipboard. Hi, he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. Tiffany sent me. This is your second notice of violation and, a fine for unauthorized lake use. Scott, I said, my voice calm but firm. Do you have any idea what the legal definition of extortion is? He flinched. We're just trying to build a better community by charging people to use a lake you don't own based on rules from an association that has no legal authority. I finished for him. Scott, you're the treasurer. You might want to think very, very carefully about what you're involved in. I let that sink in. I could see the raw panic in his eyes. He mumbled something incoherent, turned, and practically fled back to his Lexus. The treasurer was spooked. The 2 weeks that followed were Cold War. Tiffany's megaphone became a regular feature of my weekend mornings, a shrieking narration of my every supposed infraction. Meanwhile, I got quiet visitors, folks who had lived on the lake for decades. They were all afraid of legal trouble, afraid of Tiffany's relentless bullying energy. To each of them, I gave the same quiet advice. Don't pay her another dime. Document everything. Just wait. My own preparations were nearing completion. I had the complete ownership history. I had printed high-resolution satellite imagery with the legal boundaries clearly marked in red. I had copies of every single active lease agreement, including the one signed by Tiffany and Scott. Their lease explicitly stated that any and all disputes were to be handled through written communication with the trust's designated manager, me. Crucially, the lease stated that the lessee shall not establish any governing body or levy any fees upon other residents. She was in violation of her own lease. I consulted with the family's longtime attorney, Arthur, who reviewed my file. It's perfect, he chuckled. She's built her own gallows. The trick, my boy, is to let her walk right up to them and put the noose on herself. The tipping point came on a Saturday morning. I had decided it was time to replace the small, rickety dock that serviced my personal cottage. I had the materials delivered. I was 3 posts into the installation when Tiffany came marching down the path with 2 of her compliant followers. She was holding a phone to her ear. "Yes, that's right, officer," she said, her voice dripping with false panic. "I'm the HOA president. There's a man here who is not a resident. He's on our common property, and he's building an unauthorized structure and refusing to leave. He's been threatening us for weeks." I just kept working. The distant sound of siren began to drift through the trees. Tiffany hung up the phone with a triumphant smirk. "The police are on their way," she announced. "You are in a great deal of trouble. Trespassing, vandalism. We're going to have you removed and press full charges." "Okay, Tiffany," I said calmly. "You do that." Her face contorted with rage at my nonchalance. She was expecting fear. The arrival of 2 county sheriff's deputies felt almost theatrical. Tiffany strode toward them, a commanding figure of righteous indignation. "Thank goodness you're here, officers," she began. "I'm Tiffany Sterling, the president of the community HOA. This man," she pointed at me, "has been a nightmare. He's been trespassing on our community land for weeks, and now he's building this illegal structure." Deputy Sutton, a man with a tired, seen-it-all expression, turned to me. "What's your name? Do you live here?" I gave him my name. "I do. That's my place right there. And this," I gestured to the half-built dock, "is the replacement for my old dock on my property." Tiffany scoffed loudly. "His property, officer? This is all common area managed by the HOA. We all own it together. He's a tenant, and a delinquent one at that." She handed the deputy her ridiculously thin binder. "Officers," I said, pushing off the lumber pile. I was carrying my own heavy binder. "Perhaps I can clear this up." I opened my binder for the deputies. "Gentlemen, this is a certified copy of the original 1947 deed for this entire 300-acre parcel, showing its purchase by my great-grandfather. This is the county plat map, which designates this land as a single property, not a subdivision." I flipped the page. "These are the articles for the family trust that has legally owned and managed this single property for the last 70 years, of which I am the current sole trustee and manager." Sutton's eyebrows went up. "And this," I continued, turning to the next tab, "is the fully executed lease agreement for the property at Lot 1. It's signed by Tiffany and Scott Sterling. It's a standard tenant lease, not a deed of ownership. And right here in Section 4B, it states that the lessee shall not establish any governing body or levy any fees upon other residents. By creating this so-called HOA and extorting funds from the other tenants, she is in material breach of her own lease." The silence that followed was profound. Tiffany's face went from pale to a blotchy, horrifying shade of purple. The color drained from the faces of her 2 allies. Deputy Sutton looked from my binder to Tiffany's face, a slow, slight smile touching the corner of his mouth. "So, let me get this straight, son," he said, pointing at me. "You own all this, the whole shebang, the lake, the woods, all the land the houses are on." "That's correct, officer," I said. "Every last square inch. These individuals are my tenants. All of them." Sutton nodded slowly, then turned his gaze entirely on Tiffany. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat, "it appears you're the one who is trespassing. You've come off your leased parcel onto your landlord's private property to harass him while he makes improvements to his own land. And this," he tapped her flimsy binder, "is essentially a work of fiction, a potentially fraudulent one at that. So, here's what's going to happen," Sutton continued, leaving no room for argument. "You and your friends are going to walk back to your houses. You're going to cease all activities related to this association effective immediately. You will not contact this gentleman again unless it's to pay your rent. And if I get another call out here about you bothering him, you'll be the one I'm citing." Her head gave a tiny, defeated nod. The war was over. The self-appointed queen had been dethroned in front of her subjects and the law. And the absolute best part? She had paid for the deputies to come and witness her own humiliation. The immediate aftermath was a beautiful, deafening silence. Tiffany and her two cronies scurried back to their respective houses. The following Saturday, I had a printed invitation delivered to each of the 10 houses. The letter was simple, professionally worded. The Blue Heron Lake Homeowners Aesthetics Association is hereby formally dissolved. The day of the meeting, everyone came, even Tiffany and Scott, standing at the back, radiating misery. I kept it brief. I introduced myself as the sole trustee. I explained the history of the trust and how the community was legally structured. This document, I said, holding up the standard lease, is the only one that governs our relationship. There is no HOA. There are no bylaws. My only rules are the ones in your lease. Pay your rent on time, don't damage the property, and be a decent neighbor. That's it. Then I addressed the financial element. I'm aware that some of you have been paying fees to a now defunct organization. I have no legal authority to compel a reimbursement from the parties who collected that money. However, I will be crediting every tenant's account for the full amount they paid in dues over the last 6 months. It will be deducted from your future rent payments. There was a collective gasp. Mr. Henderson's face broke into a wide, genuine smile. It was a powerful gesture that demonstrated I was firmly on their side. Finally, I looked toward the back of the crowd, directly at Tiffany and Scott. For the residents of Lot 1, I said, your current lease is in material breach. Given the circumstances, I am providing you with 2 options. Option 1. You can voluntarily terminate your lease within 60 days with no penalty. Option 2. You can sign a new lease agreement, which explicitly forbids the creation of any representative bodies or the levying of fees. If you choose option 2, any future violation of these terms will result in immediate eviction proceedings. You have 1 week to inform me in writing of your decision. A month later, a moving truck pulled up to Lot 1. They chose option 1. They were gone before their 60 days were up. The pearl white Lexus disappeared from the lakefront for good. In the years since, Blue Heron Lake has become the peaceful sanctuary it was always meant to be. I finished my dock. Mr. Henderson's roses are more vibrant than ever. And every time I paddle my canoe out on that silent, glassy water, I smile, thinking of the day the wannabe queen called the cops on her king, only to find out she was just a guest in his castle. Let that be a lesson. Before you try to start your own little kingdom, make sure you're not building it on someone else's land. Thanks for listening to my story. I want to know, if you were one of the tenants being extorted, would you have waited patiently for the landlord to act, or would you have stood up to Tiffany yourself right away? Let me know your thoughts on justice, landlord power, and HOA abuse in the comments below. Like this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice served.